A lot of crap has happened that I ain't been able to address since I've been out of town. There's one particular issue, though, I want to address, although it makes me really goddamn angry, and I know when I get that way, I get a little quick-spoken and hyperbolic. It can be tad hard for some people to follow.
You don't say.
So I figured to make sure I really got the point across, I put on my Defiance 13 hat and channel a little bit slower, more direct spoken translation of this anger.
Nice hat.
So you ready to do this, Robert?
Yes.
What in the ever-loving fuck is wrong with that tangerine-tinted taint that calls himself a goddamn president? It's bad enough that knob-slobbering Saddam is sending secret police and the U.S. military into U.S. cities to use them against U.S. citizens. But when 6 distinguished members of Congress who have not only taken an oath to protect this country from all enemies, foreign and domestic, and serve it as an elected official, but have also put their life on the line taking that oath as members of our armed services or intelligence communities, come out and tell members of our armed forces that not only do they not have to follow unlawful, unconstitutional orders from their chain of command, but they have an obligation not to? Where the ever-loving fuck does this seditious, bone-spur-suffering, draft-dodging, dementia-riddled discount dictator find the goddamn audacity to threaten these people with death?
There comes a point when you have to stop and ask yourself how a man so small in spirit ever convinced himself he was large enough to lead a country. This president, painted in self-importance and insecurity, has taken it upon himself to unleash federal agents and even elements of our own military into American cities, not to defend democracy, but to intimidate the very people he swore to serve. And then, as if this moment weren't already staggering, 6 members of Congress, all of whom have lived their oath in uniform or in intelligence work, all of whom know the weight of service not as a slogan, but as a lived reality, step forward to remind the armed forces that they do not have to obey unlawful or unconstitutional orders, that in fact their duty compels them not to. And for that, for offering clarity and courage when our nation needed it most, this man who dodged the very service they performed somehow found the audacity to threaten them, to speak of consequences he himself never had the spine to face. There is something profoundly dangerous about a leader who mistakes loyalty for obedience and power for permission, a man who believes the country belongs to him rather than the people who built it, bled for it, and guard its steel. And if there is any justice left in this republic, he will one day have to answer for every moment he treated this nation like it was his to use rather than his to protect.
All for understanding the oath that they didn't dodge like Donnie and telling active duty service members that it's okay to obey the law. For that, they should be tried for sedition and hanged. Bold words from a guy who has 34 fucking felonies, although it's not nearly as ironic as the fact that no gag reflex Gaddafi incited an actual insurrection and then pardoned all the people who were actually convicted of sedition. Meanwhile, they cry about the dangerous rhetoric of calling them fascists simply for doing fascist shit after their favorite podcaster was turned into a Pez dispenser, even though they conveniently ignored that the Minnesota Speaker of the House was assassinated in her own home with her husband and her dog because of their rhetoric. Now have the President of the United States leveling death threats against Senator Mark Kelly, whose wife has already survived an assassination attempt because of their rhetoric.
They're being condemned for doing the one thing their oath actually requires, understanding it. They did not dodge service like Donald, they wore that oath in uniform. And all they did was remind active duty service members that obeying the law is not optional. It is the foundation of the republic. For that simple act of integrity, he says they should be tried for sedition and hanged, which are bold words for a man sitting beneath the weight of 34 felony convictions, and somehow even bolder when you consider that he incited a real insurrection and then handed out pardons to the very people convicted of the crimes he now pretends to abhor. Yet his movement clutches its pearls about dangerous rhetoric, offended that anyone would call them fascists while they repeat, endorse, and enact the very behaviors that have defined fascism in every age of history. And in the same breath, they ignore the truth that the Speaker of the House in Minnesota was murdered in her own home, murdered alongside her husband and her dog, because of the same poisonous words they keep spreading. And now somehow the President of the United States has leveled death threats against Senator Mark Kelly, whose wife already survived an assassination attempt that was itself born from the fever swamps of their rhetoric. There is a cost to words and a cost to lies, a cost to stoking the darkest instincts in a nation already trembling under the weight of its own history. And the people raising the screams about civility are the same people who soaked our politics in gasoline and who keep pretending they cannot smell the smoke.
And all this time they say that Democrats should be hung for encouraging people to follow the law, but they didn't really mean it. They just want accountability, all while they're continuing to hide the Trump files featuring Jeffrey Epstein because, heaven forbid, they have any fucking accountability. Because it's not accountability they want to account a bully, and that's why that DUI hire at the Department of Whiskey Leaks is launching an investigation into Senator Mark Kelly and threatening to recall him to active duty to court-martial him. This is disgusting. This is putting literal targets on the back of people who are just standing up for their country. This is inviting violence and terrorism against members of Congress for doing their job. This is a tried and true tactic used by every authoritarian throughout history to justify undermining anybody who stands up to their authority and to bully and threaten anybody who ever dares speak against dear leader with persecution and death.
And through all of this, they hide behind the latest distraction. They have christened the Trump files, the ones tangled up with Jeffrey Epstein, as if pointing in any other direction might save them from the accountability they refuse to face. They don't want truth. They do not want responsibility. What they want is a bully they can orbit, someone loud enough to drown out the sound of their own cowardice. So now the same crowd, who are behaving like drunk frat boys in the Department of Risky Behavior, have decided to launch an investigation into Senator Mark Kelly, hoping to drag him before a court-martial for the crime of reminding service members of their oath, of telling them what a real president should tell them, that duty is bound to the Constitution, not to the whims of a single man. And by doing this, they are putting targets on the backs of the very men and women who have the courage to speak plainly in a moment of national danger. It is the oldest trick in the authoritarian playbook. Discredit anyone who dares to stand upright when the leader demands silence. Every strong man in history has reached for the same tool, delegitimizing the voices that remind people of their own power. And Donald Trump is simply the next one in that long, grim line, a man trying to turn fear into a throne, hoping no one notices that real leadership, real honor, and real patriotism are standing firmly on the other side of him.
If you ever needed any evidence that America's greatest enemy is damn sure domestic and it's sitting in the people's house he is tearing apart, literally and figuratively, well, this is it. And those brave members of Congress standing up to that threat, despite credible threats to their lives and well-being, are goddamn heroes. And true heroes, like the ones who flew fucking combat missions in Iraq and a goddamn rocket into space, are not going to be bullied and intimidated by a draft-dodging, knob-gobbling, cankled kumquat. And anybody who still stands behind labia neck Nero can get all the way fucked, because he's a traitor, and if you support a traitor, that makes you a traitor too, and we've got no place for traitors in this country.
And if anyone ever needed proof that America's greatest enemy is not lurking overseas, but sitting here at home in the very house that belongs to the people, tearing at its foundations, both figuratively and literally, then this moment is that proof. And standing against that threat are the members of Congress who understand courage not as a story, but as a life they have lived. Men and women who flew combat missions over foreign deserts, who rode rockets into the quiet darkness of space, who have carried the weight of their service in their bones and still rise to speak the truth even as credible threats shadow their lives. They are the heroes. They are the heroes in its oldest and truest sense, not because they are fearless, but because they are faithful to the republic they swore to defend. And no draft-dodging clown trying to crown himself in borrowed glory, and no would-be Nero fiddling above the flames he helped create will ever bully or intimidate them. Not now, not ever. And for those who still stand behind him, who cling to a man willing to set his own country ablaze for power, they are choosing their side with full clarity. And history has never been gentle with those who choose treachery over the country that raised them. Because loyalty to a tyrant is not loyalty, it is abandonment. And America, bruised, battered, and stubborn as ever, will remember who defended her and who walked away when she needed guardians the most. Defiance till death.